We have Assistant Director Hugh Ogle to provide the presentation to us from the Public Utilities Department. Hugh, if you want to go ahead and share, I think we can start the presentation.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everything's well. Can everyone see it on the screen?
So far, so good.
Okay, great. Yes, as alluded to, we're here. I'm going to discuss our WS-011 policy. And as Mr. Jones explained, we're talking about what a one lot removed is, its purpose, history of approvals, and our recommended changes. This is an example off our GIS of a one lot removed. This is one that was approved and was constructed. On the right side of the screen, you would see the green line from this lot out to Millage Avenue extension. That is the private sewer service that was requested. That easement that is private belongs to this homeowner with an easement that was obtained from this property owner. There is to allow them to connect to our sanitary sewer system. This side displays the easement to access this parcel with water. For the same purpose to serve this lot. The lot above it is the envelope flag lot, we like to call it, and this is how they got the water to that lot there that was theoretically landlocked. I'm assuming that was also ingress egress out to South Millage Avenue for that lot as well. The purpose of this policy is to create an incentive and to lower a cost barrier for property owners that are one lot removed from our water, sewer system and would like to connect.
Hugh, if I could interrupt for 1 second, sir, do you think you could make this a little bit larger? If you'll click on the very top to the slideshow, right, you're close to it, top left, all the way up a little higher to the left, that one right there. Yes, sir. There you go.
Better.
And you can use the arrow keys to kind of advance the slides.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. I apologize. But to create an incentive and a lower cost barrier for property owners, at this time, if we were to require a property to pay for an extension, 100-foot sanitary sewer main extension, just materials alone would be roughly $12,000. And that doesn't include engineering, labor, equipment. You'd have to multiply that times 2 for both the water and sewer. With the one lot removed, it'd be $1,000 to $2,000 per water and sewer line on average of $4,000. Many lot requests come from customers who have septic tank issues and would wish to tie in onto the sewer system, requests from the buyers and sellers to tie in, and renters wanting to improve their single-family residence. This would also encourage property owners to connect to the water and sewer system as opposed to drilling a well or digging a septic system or creating an unauthorized joint use water and sewer service, meter or sewer stub. That kind of goes back into public health and safety. If someone puts in a well and a septic tank and then does not monitor or maintenance that septic system or well system properly, the possibility of groundwater contamination and things of that nature would exist. To ensure that the water distribution system and sanitary sewer collection system serving a property is maintained by a responsible agency. That kind of falls into that same category of ensuring public health and safety. All these all this would be insured to be, permitted through our Athens-Clarke County Building Inspection Department. And, to establish uniform guidelines and minimum requirements for all individual parcels in which Athens-Clarke County Public Water and Sanitary Sewer System is providing service, regardless of the local, relative to government jurisdiction. This is a kind of an overview of our existing policy. The customer has to provide documentation to substantiate the subject property was subdivided prior to February of 1992. The lot addresses and proposed pathway for the requested water and or sewer services is established, and executed easement conveyances in a form acceptable to the chief plumbing inspector for Athens-Clarke County and the inspection department. A notarized affidavit from the property owner stating that he or she is willing to grant an easement, and no easement will be allowed to cross a public street relative to any proposed private service or services. Agreement by the property owner to install backflow devices approved by the chief plumbing inspector for the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County and adjacent to the requested water meter. And a letter from the property owner requesting consideration for the exemption, transmitting the above identified information to the Public Utilities Director, acknowledging all provisions as outlined in this policy statement. Since 2017, this is a list of the one lot removed that's been approved. Currently, the timeline for approval is 10 to 12 weeks, and then possibly 6 to 8 weeks for construction. Departmental approval would be in a few days. Imagine if a failing septic tank going months while waiting for approval could have a substantial environmental impact if not maintained properly. An example is Public Utilities had an elderly customer, lady, that really couldn't afford to pay for the extension to run a sewer main, but she was faced with a failing septic tank. She had to get that tank pumped out while waiting on the exemption to be approved. If she was not a responsible customer and the failing tank went on for months, that would have been devastating to the environmental surroundings, and it put a burden on that customer for that extended time. She was having to have that tank pumped like every 2 to 3 days, depending upon her usage. To date, Mayor and Commission has approved all exemptions requests to date. The recommended change to the approval process would be any and all requests for the one lot removed exemption must be accompanied by the information required under the current policy. It's subject to review. It would be subject to review and approval by the Public Utilities Department Director. Applicants that are denied a variance by the Public Utilities Director may request being added to the next available Mayor and Commission agenda for consideration of their variance request. And PUD would report yearly to the Mayor and Commission of the approved exemptions to this policy WS-011. Does anyone have any questions? Or something I can explain more clearly?
I have a question, and I think I just missed some of the figures in this with the costs. Is this changing anything with the costs or not? And what were those costs to connect that you referred to earlier? And I guess the follow-up there is just to clarify that this would not change anything, where the county is not assuming the costs for this.
No, ma'am, it would not change anything as far as the county assuming any of the cost. The numbers are based off of prices for materials to date. Right now, just for the materials to do a 100-foot sewer main extension, it would be right around $12,000. That's for manhole structures, pipe, the material to stub out the service for the property owner.
Okay, that's, I put down one figure at 12,000 to start with, and that really didn't work with the math you gave me later on, but, okay.
I got a question.
Sure.
Maybe you kind of covered this when you're going through the slideshow. Sorry, I was trying to do my best to read along and hear at the same time. But what was the rationale for this initial policy? I mean, essentially, we're being asked to change it, but could you do your best to maybe convey like why you think it was set up like this in the first place?
The reason it was set up like this is this come along after unification time, and at that time, it was also to address our joint use policy. So that is to get everyone separated and have their own sewer service. A lot of times when you have what we call joint use services or multiple units being served by one coming across multiple lots, it was a handshake agreement back in the day. There weren't any easements. So when a maintenance issue arises, no one wants to accept the blame or take on the responsibility for the maintenance and the repair. And also is to provide an opportunity for people that do not front our utility to gain access to our services. It prevents septic tanks from being installed and then them not being maintained properly. It also generates revenue for Athens-Clarke County Public Utility to serve more customers. And it's fire protection is always a big consideration when evaluating a property for a one lot removed.
Great. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I have another question. You just, would there be reasons, what are the reasons for this not to, I mean, are all of the requests going to be approved? What would be reasons for not approving this? I mean, not approving it, like if it comes directly to you, are they all going to be approved? That's basically what I'm asking.
No, ma'am. If it's more than one lot removed, then obviously that would not fall under this policy, and we would not honor that request. If the sewer service would be over the allowable distance from EPD, which I think at this time is 250 feet, we could not approve that because of federal guidelines that are in place now.
Okay. But otherwise, if they follow those guidelines, they most likely be approved.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Go ahead, Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm hearing here, I'm almost puzzled by why this wasn't just like a work session presentation or something, but it seems to make sense to me. Like, just do what our staff is recommending and move on. So if others are ready, I'm happy to make a motion to recommend the staff recommendation to the full commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main issue I'm seeing here is just to to create a more efficient process for the approval of these requests instead of them going into the agenda cycle and coming before us for a vote.
Right.
We're going to give some more discretion to staff to just give staff approval and move these things on through.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's what we're looking at. Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Myers.
I do have a question here that's just tangentially related to this, only because I had someone make a request up in the front of my neighborhood over here on the east side. And I just wanted to understand something so that if I do get in a situation, I can explain it. And that is, I live over here in Green Acres. And looking at the sewage maps over here, there was someone who up in the front of the neighborhood who had exactly the issue you were talking about. I'm the last one approved, where a septic situation was problematic, and they got the approval and tied in, and it did take a while to do, but they got through doing that. But when I went and looked at the map, as I brought up in another meeting, the front of my neighborhood in my house, I mean, I don't really just care about my house, but the front of my neighborhood in Clarkston, which I assume were early subdivisions over here on the east side, do not have sewer service. And I was wondering, for me to understand this, the process now, if I were building this subdivision, I'd have to be working with the county, like from scratch. But you guys come in and put down the pipes and stuff. If I'm the developer, do I then pay you for, like, you charge me a fee, and then, like, how's that work? Like, because there's like I said, these bunches of houses close up, and I'm just curious how that works in general with the new subdivision.
But if a new subdivision is being constructed today, they would get an engineer to give us a set of civil drawings to review and approve. And once those were approved, you as the developer would hire an approved utility contractor to do the installation under inspection by all forces in engineering management. And once it was installed and all the inspections passed and the lines were approved, then the right of way and the easements would be conveyed to us, and we would maintain the line at that time.
And so the costs then obviously would be passed on to the person buying the house. Do we have any programs for in-town neighborhoods that are on sewer, and I consider these on sewer, on septic, to somehow, because obviously that's a bigger issue. There's we don't have any programs in place. This is, like I said, beyond the scope of this question, but
not that I'm aware of, no, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Hugh, one quick question. Now, if someone builds a brand new subdivision and they're within a very specified distance of a water or sewer connection, do we require them to tap into that as part of that new subdivision?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, do I hear a motion to advance this proposed policy for consideration of the full mayor and commission?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Okay, moving right along.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Ogle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ogle.
20 minutes.
Okay, so our next item is sort of, thinking about the broadening of our charge. At our last meeting, we were discussing some citizen complaints that I've fielded from some residents close to Broad Street, in particular, the sort of Deering Street area that's right up on the Broad Street corridor, regarding loud vehicles at all hours of the night, sort of loud cruising. And, I've done some looking into this and looking at ways we can possibly address this. And so I had some things just to kind of open the discussion. We've seen some advances in technology recently to address these problems of loud vehicles, sort of the sociopathic, 120 decibel loud, sort of look at me, I'm an egoist type driving. There's what's called a noise camera, and they've been deployed in Knoxville, Tennessee. They're doing a pilot program right now in Knoxville. There's a product that government's using that will measure the volume of a vehicle as it drives by, and if it goes above a predetermined threshold, it will snag a picture of the license plate. Right now, they're testing the functionality of this device, making sure it's properly calibrated, collecting the information they need. But the thought is, much like we use speed cameras in school zones, we can set a threshold at, say, at a predetermined number, 80 decibels, 85, etc. At 85 decibels, that does hearing damage. And we could possibly, draft a municipal ordinance that would ticket these individuals for the cost of harm that they're exacting on the communities by driving these dystopian loud vehicles. So I've seen them in Knoxville, Tennessee. I know in Paris, France, they've had a big problem in their in-town neighborhoods, particularly with souped-up mopeds and scooters that are extremely loud. So they've deployed noise cameras there as well. So I would love to hear thoughts from the committee, but I certainly would be interested in staff doing some outreach to Knoxville possibly. And I can send you some articles I found too, Mr. Jones, to see what sort of products are there and how we might address this growing problem. So any other thoughts from my colleagues? Commissioner Myers.
I don't have any particular thoughts about this noise camera and look forward to learning about them. I just wanted to understand a little better the broadened scope of our work here. Could you repeat or someone repeat what the mayor asked us to do? And are we now considering like gas leaf blowers, loud cars, loud parties? I mean, how broad? It's unclear to me what we're working on.
Yeah, maybe Mr. Jones, you've got that in front of you.
I do. The expanded language goes as such: investigate the noise ordinance, specifically machines, vehicles, and amplified noises.
Great. Thank you.
So that covers
A
gas,
lot.
that and that.
Yeah, I think that's broad enough. Yeah. Any other input? Commissioner Houle?
Yeah, I'm open to looking into the cameras thing. The one thing that I'd also like additional information on is how do we delineate between someone's vehicle that might be loud because they're broke and their muffler fell off versus loud because they've intentionally modified their vehicle to be loud. I think there's a meaningful difference there between people who are spending money to create a nuisance versus don't have money to spend and a nuisance as a result. And so if there's a way to delineate between the two, I think that would be worth understanding.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be able to do that with the camera, but somebody could always, make an appearance in court and provide evidence, and the judge with their discretion could make a determination. I don't see a problem there.
And maybe if there's a way for us to capture in the ordinance that we write, that this is to apply to things that have been intentionally modified, right? Rather than things that have fallen into that situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Maybe we could capture. I mean, if somebody just never repairs their muffler, at some point there's negligence there. I mean, they could talk with it, but I see what you're saying. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the noise camera?
I had one other, but it seemed like Sherry had a thought that we maybe should hear before we move on from that last one.
If I can, I just wanted to address that last thing. I do think we'd have a legal issue in doing that. The justification is that the noise is a problem to the community and causes harm to the community. I don't think the law is particularly concerned with what causes the difference. It may certainly be relevant in terms of like a sentence, but not whether someone committed the act or not to begin with. And I think you'd certainly raise the question of basically sort of an equal protection or just undermining the whole ordinance, right? Like if it's not a harm if someone is doing it because they are low income, then why is it a harm when someone does it otherwise? I don't know if that makes sense. I'm happy to do some research on this, but I think that will be problematic. So I wanted to point that out to you all.
Sure. Yeah, I think the context of income is, the rationale I wanted to share here, but I'm imagining that it's language that would be more about intent, if there's a way that intent can be demonstrated. But I don't know if that's.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, the problem with intent is that it's not, there's always like layers of intent. And so in this case, the intent is not going to be, I intended to make the noise. It's going to be, I intended to drive the vehicle that made the noise.
Right.
So anyways.
No, and I think that's right, Ms. Hines. It would come into in discussion with sentencing. Somebody could plead with the judge, say, look, here's my income. I haven't had enough money to fix this muffler. In the next 6 months, I promise to, or et cetera, et cetera. That's where the discretion would be triggered. Commissioner Myers, yes.
Kind of following up in that and segueing into one of these other categories, if you were making an ordinance and there could be some time limitations on it. I don't know when these complaints are coming, but I would assume they're the ones that are annoying, particularly annoying, are the ones that are at night. And so one might put that on there. And I bring that up just because I did a quick little work on the noise from the gas leaf blowers. And in fact, that seems like pretty simple in a sense, because what's out there are kind of, one option is there are communities that ban them completely. I don't think we're at a point we're doing that. And the other are communities that put restrictions on the decibel levels, making them at like 60 or 70, 75, and also the times of the day that are in there. So that might be, built into this noise play, the loud cars. It might have to do with the time as well. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, okay, we'll see how the camera can be calibrated, but I mean, I'm just as annoyed by a super loud, souped up car, during the day as I am during the night almost. I mean, if it's damaging your hearing, but I see what you're saying, Commissioner Myers. I mean, I do think that with the gas lawnscaping equipment, it would be prudent for us to explore more limitations on the usage of those. I mean, Sunday morning at 8 a.m., really? We're going to be waking up people? I think probably we need some guidelines in that regard. That would be worth exploring. Commissioner Houle?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on this. I'm imagining at this point kind of probably two ordinances coming from this, assuming they're both feasible. One that's about the vehicles and doesn't have hours, and then another that's about machinery. And the one about machinery, I think in addition to hours of use, also duration of use.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a way for people who are like on a construction zone or something to get a permit or a waiver, setting up some kind of process where people can apply if they have a professional need to do this, but otherwise there's a restriction on how long you can make that noise for as well.
Yeah, that's
so like
a good point.
Nothing before or after these hours, and then even during the day there's a limit to how long, so people aren't just leaf blowing a neighborhood for 4 hours.
Yeah. That's a good point, Commissioner Houle, and that's something that came to my mind too, seeing Mr. Hansford on the line. For me, this isn't just the obnoxious landscaping equipment, in the early morning of Sunday or Saturday when folks are trying to relax at home. But I've also gotten some complaints from folks, in neighborhoods where folks have basically set up like industrial style operations, either with like very loud table saws or woodworking machinery outside in the front yard that creates a very loud decibel that's really obnoxious and harmful for their neighbors. And Mr. Hansford, I'm just curious what sort of what you might be able to add in that regard, with these sort of almost like an unlicensed noisy business operation in residential areas, folks who just, set up these little cottage industries, with noisy machines that are ticking people off.
Yeah, we have had some complaints over the years about people setting up basically sawmills in their yard. One thing we look at is it for personal use, or are they building something to sell? Are they cutting wood to sell? Then it's then they have to have a home occupation permit, and it's probably not allowed in that respect. But if you don't mind, you may be more familiar with the regulations on using, I guess, a resident using that type of equipment outside and what the limitations are related to that.
Well, again, we look mainly at whether or not it's a business. Is the homeowner using this like firewood splitting or something like that?
Right.
If it's just somebody that has themselves, like you said, a saw, like they're like a carpenter kind of situation where they're maybe doing something inside their house, or they're just cutting wood. We've not really had too many regulations against that. I mean, the noise ordinance does speak to during the daytime, but you have to be a lot farther of a distance away. And the officer, whether it's us or it's the police department, has to determine that that noise is annoyance. So it is built into the current noise ordinance during the daytime. You just have to have a farther distance apart from the actual noise to determine it.
And what distance is that, Mr. Spagna?
300 feet.
300 feet. So football field away.
Yeah,
Basically.
I think it's night is 100 feet, and during the day it's 300 feet. Is that right, John?
Yes.
Okay. And is it a decibel limit, or is it the discretion of what is an annoyance?
It's a discretion of the officer hearing it.
I see. Well, what are your thoughts on that, Mr. Spagna? I mean, would your office be assisted by clearer guidance from the commission in enforcement, either with a decibel limit, if y'all had decibel meters, or what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, obviously a time limit that's a little bit more restrictive, maybe on the weekends, might be something that you could look at, because that seems to be, like you mentioned earlier, 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning is tough, as well as maybe a Sunday morning. But when you start to try to restrict time during the week, you are getting into landscape companies and what they're trying to do. They're trying to get out early, especially in the heat, and get this stuff done, and they move on. So you're delving into restricting businesses.
Right.
Might be a little bit more sacred on the weekends, obviously. So you start them at 10. You can't do this until 10 a.m., for instance.
Yeah.
Decibels gets very. I'm not against putting that in there, but it's just hard to enforce that. You really have to. You have to make sure you know where you're standing, how far away you are. Decibels can go up and down. Meters can be,
Sure.
calibrated differently.
Yeah.
It gets into a real tough thing for the attorney's office if you have to give a ticket on something like that.
Yeah, I almost feel like a decibel rating might be useful, if there's a machine that has been newly put in service on the roof of a building that's tremendously loud just on an ongoing basis. The decibel meter doesn't go up and down. It's just a new, almost a nuisance noise. But again, that would probably be triggered. That would trigger the discretion of the officer to say, look, this is an annoyance.
I mean, when you have time, it's pretty straightforward. If it's before a certain time, we deal with solid waste franchisees picking up too early. And it's pretty straightforward. If it's before 7 a.m., you're in violation. If it's not, then there's not a lot we can do. So it's a little easier to make a case on something like that.
I see. So time limits on activity provides a more enforceable guideline than a decibel rating.
I think so. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
If I could, real quick, John, in your professional opinion, timing's really critical here, right? So even if we set time constraints, somebody's blowing their yard at 6:30 in the morning when the time limit's at 7 a.m. But if they're done at 6:35 and you show up, police officer shows up, then what?
Well, I think the police will tell you, and so will I. We kind of have to have witnessed it happening.
That's right. That's right.
And so that does become, but it doesn't mean we can't have a conversation. Try to maybe sometimes just educate. Maybe they don't understand. They don't know that that's the time frame. We can still have that kind of a conversation, and I'm sure the police department would do the same. But as far as a citation, no, we would have to witness it happening.
And this sort of triggers a question I might have for Sherry. Sherry, what are some maybe new evolutions in code enforcement where you know, evidence could be collected and serve as, you know, prima facie evidence. I know I've seen in New York where if somebody leaves a truck idling in town, folks can take a picture of it and send it in, and then that serves as prima facie evidence for that truck being in violation of the ordinance, and then they get a fine. So it sort of removes that requirement where you have to devote staff time to patrol, or not patrol, but to respond to calls and be present to witness.
Right. So obviously speaking off the cuff on that, I can say that that has never been the practice for police, who are usually the ones enforcing these noise ordinances, because obviously code enforcement
Yeah.
is not working at 6 a.m. on Sunday.
Right.
And just generally because of these hours, I mean, I don't think code enforcement is working at 7 a.m. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. So unless there's like maybe like something specially set up. So this is usually police, and police, I'd have to look. I just haven't looked at the law recently on this issue, but I know that their practice has always been that they don't issue citations unless they witness it itself, unless it's something like, burglary, domestic
Yeah.
violence, things like that. So I
Right.
don't think that they're going to do it. The only context we have for that is witness only citations and animal services. It's like, so we do that occasionally, but that means the person who saw it is going to have to come in and testify. And if that person can't be found or isn't willing
Right.
to come in, then that case is not going to go anywhere.
Right.
If I can say really quickly, one thing to bear in mind is that we do have a noise ordinance that has been challenged and gone all the way to to the Georgia Supreme Court. And so there is, I think, some recommendation or some value in considering not changing it, because once it is changed, then we won't have that same, I guess you'd say, protection of knowing that it won't be challenged again. So we may be looking at new litigation since we've been there before. And then the main reason we have resisted the urge to use decibels is because there's just the question of what is scientifically reliable and valid enough to say that it was actually X number of decibels. And I don't know what the equipment is right now on that, but that's why we've always used a distance and a time, because that's very easy. All you need is a measuring tape, and anybody can handle that without us having to think about bringing in experts, God forbid, to testify about a specific device. So that's one consideration. And then the final consideration is, I think it was Commissioner Houle had mentioned wanting to have a duration. I think that is problematic for sort of the same reasons, because that would mean that a code enforcement officer or police officer would have to sit for that entire period, to make sure that there was continuous use during that duration. So that may be problematic.
That makes sense. Commissioner Myers?
Yeah. So I'm guessing what you're saying, Sherry and John would be following up on this, that video evidence with the change of technology and videos, like if you had a video of someone out there, I don't know, blowing their lawn at 4 a.m, that doesn't count for anything. We haven't, in the legal sense.
Well, it's just a question of whether the officer is going to be willing to issue that citation. So, like animal services, if we have a barking dog case, animal services will take that kind of evidence, but they have a history of doing witness only citations. Police department does not, and I really would like to involve them in this conversation, just because I have not looked into the legal background behind that decision. But I can tell you, you can take a picture of someone's speeding down the road. You could take take a video. I cannot speak very well today. You could take a video showing your own speedometer and that person flying by you, and the police are not going to go issue a citation to that person, even though I think we could all agree that that video is pretty decent evidence. So I just don't know what they would say about this particular question, but there's certainly no history of them doing that.
And the police department apologizes for not being here. The person who was supposed to be here is working on something pretty critical right now.
That's cool.
I can tell you.
Those are good questions. We can do those. Go ahead, Mr. Spagna.
All I was going to say to Commissioner Myers was that I can tell you that if we received something like a video or something of that nature, and we felt it was clear enough, we might not issue a citation, but we would have a conversation. And we would start there. And if it kept happening, I certainly would seek guidance of the attorney's office. If I could show them that, there's 3 different videos at 3 different times, and we would try to get compliance. So I would definitely have a conversation if we felt strongly enough.
And I think that's a good point, Mr. Spagna. It might not necessarily, satisfy the court's criteria or, the attorney's office, but it certainly could trigger your action to try to mitigate the situation. And that certainly counts for something in my book. So, Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious. Some of these ideas we're talking about, that it sounds like it would be fairly impractical to try to enforce, and hold up and get the evidence that could hold up in court. Is there still a value in making adjustments to the policy just to give code enforcement the opportunity to have that conversation and say, like, hey, this is the ordinance, this is the expectation that we set forth in the community? I mean, if how this goes a lot of the time already is that those are the conversations you're having, and then after that people tend to change their behavior, is there a value in having something that might be even more difficult to enforce than current policy, but enables you to have that conversation?
Well, Commissioner Houle, if I could, I think Commissioner Myers in the chat has asked us to provide an overview of the noise ordinance as it stands today. That seems like a fairly decent next step for us to come to you all with the noise ordinance and kind of go through it, so we're all kind of reading from the same sheet of music. Attorney Hines has noted that our current policy has gone all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court, and of course I will defer to our attorney. That being said, this committee could still review the policy, make recommendations. Of course, and staff will be here to provide any guidance that you might need. But what a theme I've heard today, though, is education on our current ordinance. Whether it's one-on-one interaction, or in Greenville, South Carolina. I've seen Greenville, South Carolina in their downtown have signs that talk about loud amplified music, because apparently they probably have a challenge related to music being amplified through cars, but also they talk about the modifications made to motorcycles and cars as well as noise or amplified noise as well, and they just have signage that says please don't do this. So I think there's a number of ways we could probably approach it.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think following up on what Commissioner Houle said, answering your question, I do find value in, in having policy that allows staff to have these conversations with folks. Sure, it might not result in throwing the book at somebody right off the bat or whatever, but I've always heard great feedback about Mr. Spagna, Mr. Hansford's professionalism in helping to mitigate these ordinance violations through conversation. And if it doesn't productively change the situation, of course, steps can be taken to ratchet up action to try to get compliance. But I think that our code enforcement overall is doing a fine job. So I'm okay with giving them more tools and discretion to intervene in these scenarios. I think we're sort of coming around talking about maybe some more time limits on activities, on the weekends in particular. I mean, that's certainly where I'm getting the complaints, those times when code enforcement is not on call, they're not working on the weekends. Maybe we can find some policy where, we educate folks that, this is no longer allowed on Sunday mornings. You can't do this activity. This is irritating people. This is harming people's hearing. And, we can't get code enforcement officers out there, but citizens can send in videos or pictures, and then that can maybe trigger a conversation. I am a little hesitant to be deploying the police through the neighborhoods on the weekends, right off the bat. I think there's a softer touch to take first, and if we can find a way to craft something that could get staff to have those conversations, then I think a large majority of these situations would result in a resolution without any of this per se, criminal legal action. Go ahead, Commissioner Myers. You're muted.
I just wanted to follow up on the comment that I put in the chat about an overview of the current noise ordinance, and I added in there an overview of the complaints, the number of, and the kind of code enforcement follow-up would be important to have. And actually, I'd like to add to that is where code enforcement and the building inspector's office, what their perspective, what ideas they have. I mean, this is not my daily job. And you all might have some answers, just the reality of what you're seeing that could be a helpful perspective for us about what will work or what won't work. Or, I don't want us to be making.
Well, go ahead and answer, Mr. Hansford, if you've got some ideas. Right now, I think we've made clear we're hearing complaints about noise on the weekends, from some of these loud gas landscaping equipment, etc. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so if it's a business that John mentioned, and I appreciate your kind words, Russell, about work, but if it's a business that's operating, I think we've had pretty good success on contacting them the following week, when we hear from citizens, because even if it's not something we can cite over, we always have conversations once we get a complaint. And we've been pretty successful on that. When we're talking about vehicles, though, I think that really falls into the police realm, because code enforcement really handles issues on private property. And then after hours, if it was a party or something like that, that would also be the police. But John and I can talk before the next meeting and see if there's anything we recommend. The time frames and the distances, I think that's all within your purview, and we'll follow whatever you guys decide on. But compliance is always our goal. And we find with not just these noise ordinances, but with a lot of ordinances, it's just ignorance of the ordinance. People just don't know a lot of times. And once they find out, they seem to follow it. But you're always going to have some people that feel like they have a right to do what they want to do when they want to do it.
Yeah,
so
right.
Those are the ones that's hard to correct. John, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, other than when I first stated that if we got a very good video or something like somebody leaf blowing early in the morning or something like that, I was willing to say we could have that conversation. You got to remember, sometimes people like just tattling on their neighbors. And I don't want to get into just people calling and saying, well, they were blowing, they were leaf blowing, and I heard you could go talk to them. I really don't want to get into a he said, she said. I'd rather have some evidence that this is happening.
Yeah.
And something very easy for our officers to say, look, we've seen the video or whatever.
Right.
But not that we're just hearing people argue between themselves. I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. No, that's right. You got to have a firm foundation to act upon.
Yes.
Yeah. I get that for sure. Yeah, one of these, I like how Mr. Hansford mentioned, the businesses being, amenable, that makes sense. They want to keep doing business. They want to be in good graces with the government. And, I certainly notice in my neighborhood, there's, there are some, landscaping businesses who, are scheduled on Sundays. I mean, they come into the neighborhoods on Sundays with big trucks. So, this might be sort of an easier fix than we think. If we could just kind of shift their schedule into the week, that could create some more peacefulness in our neighborhoods. So, did you have something, Commissioner Myers? Okay. So, all right, Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, just one more thing I wanted to bring up, going back to the motor vehicles thing. Are y'all familiar with the term rolling coal?
Yes.
Okay. I guess for those who are not, it's basically intentionally modifying your vehicle to allow you to blast unfiltered smoke out the back. And I'm sure everyone here has witnessed vehicles. It's often larger trucks that have these pipes that just billow black smoke. And when that's happening, that's actually, it's like a switch you hit to make it do that. So there's definitely an intent there. And they're often, I find, the same types of vehicles that are modified to be loud. And one thing that where this overlaps with noise and the idea of cameras is you could probably obscure the view of your plate if you were blowing smoke at the same time. But also, I don't want to get too afield from the assignment we have here. Maybe it'd be worth talking to the mayor if we could wrap it in. But as I understand it, it's illegal by federal regulations to modify your vehicle in that way. But there's generally a lack of enforcement unless like a locality decides to prioritize it. And I don't know if there's a way that we could, when we're pursuing this noise ordinance possibility, also look at the pollutants, because that's, in addition to, noise, a very toxic thing.
I'd be in favor of that. I mean, Commissioner Hool, if you'd like to bring it up with the mayor, I could bring it up. Maybe Mayor Gertz could just tack on just a little bit, and have us look into rolling coal, because that kind of triggers a little different level of scrutiny there, where we're actually looking at exhaust emissions as opposed to noise per se. But I mean, I would be open to that. I think that those things are just certainly obnoxious. So, Commissioner Myers. Sorry, did you have something extra, Commissioner Hool?
Oh, I guess just if folks here are amenable, if staff can look into maybe ways to enforce that too, because that'd be different than a decibel meter, obviously. But it's pretty self-evident. You can kind of tell vehicles that do it because there's stains all over these big pipes and stuff, right? So it'd just be some kind of photo or video evidence that they were performing that, within the bounds of the county.
That might be another question for Ms. Hines, and for the police. When the police can show up to our next meeting, that's something we could definitely ask them, how, what regs are on the books regarding rolling coal and how is it being enforced here locally? Commissioner Myers.
In my 10-second search of rolling coal, I came up with another word here, which, triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind because, as you guys know, or some of you know, I'm an avid bicyclist. I go out in the edges of into the other counties. The word that came up was intimidation, and that as a cyclist, that is used as intimidation. It's not, there's a pollution, but when someone does that I'm like, oh, is that the person who's going to be stopping and screaming at us or backing up or pulling over too sharply? So I think that has, in terms of education, that's not okay. I do feel that there's a need for that as well. It does, it happens more in our neighboring counties, but we got plenty of rural areas as well.
Okay. All right.
I see people roll coal down Tallahassee and Normaltown and Atlanta Highway on a regular basis. So I can tell you that it's definitely happening here quite a bit in Athens-Clarke County.
Okay, if we're going to kind of go down this road rolling coal, I think we are going to want the mayor to kind of tack a little something on for us.
Yes, sir.
Sort of get staff time devoted on that. So I can talk to the mayor.
Could I ask a question? Because I'm, in North Carolina, Georgia, they're very different. North Carolina, the DMV manages their state inspections that you have to have for your vehicle. That there are levels of exhaust that could be
right.
Is there something like that in the state of Georgia?
We don't have that in Athens because we don't have enough residents. I think in the more dense metro areas around Atlanta, they have emissions inspections.
Yes, thank you.
Not here in Athens.
Yes.
The other issue with tacking it on to specifically emissions inspections is you can't stop someone who's registered in another county from doing it. So if we went the emissions inspections route, that would only stop people in Clarke County with Clarke County plates. from modifying their vehicle that way. It wouldn't stop somebody from another county from rolling coal through the county on the way home. So
Yeah. Okay, we'll try to tack that on. Any other thoughts, Mr. Jones? I think sort of putting a pin. We're looking at the noise cameras, and we're looking to get the police joining us at the next meeting, and we're looking to get a noise ordinance overview a little bit more. I think we had a great discussion today. Anything else for you?
Just a quick recap: noise ordinance next meeting, along with complaints, follow-ups associated with code enforcement. So a little bit of data, a little bit of research on Knoxville, Tennessee, and the noise camera.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Police will be here. Yep, we could do that.
That's great.
Maybe one thing I'd add to that list is if Doug and John, when y'all are meeting to talk, if you have any recommendations, in addition to an overview of the ordinance, if there's any recommendations to consider too, just to try to move the conversation along.
And we will do that. And I think the police are going to have a lot more statistics than us, Manager Jones. So we might want to get their statistics as well on noise complaints.
Sounds good. I'll pull together a meeting with Deputy Chief and y'all, and we'll start working on this.
That's great. Okay, well, we're right in an hour, and I was a little hesitant about going back on WebEx, but I think we had a great discussion. So thanks everybody for your patience with the technology, and thanks staff for your great presentations and input. I think we're moving in the right direction, and I look forward to seeing y'all again next month, hopefully in person.
Question about next month.
Yes.
Did we have a motion to adjourn?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're supposed to confirm quorum for our next meeting according to our agenda, but our next meeting is currently scheduled for when a number of us are going to be in Tuscaloosa. So, okay. But it's also, if we bumped it back a week, which we've done a few times now, we'd still be in that same part of the agenda cycle. We'd still be the same week as the voting meeting. So yeah. I would move to switch our date from the 1st to the 8th of September.
I'll be able to tell you that no one from my office will be able to be there because we have a conference ourselves on the 8th.
I would say we need the attorney's office on this next one as well.
Yeah. Well,
could you move to the 7th?
What about
our conference is the 7th and the 8th?
Okay. Let me see.
I mean, Fridays aren't the best, but is the 9th a possibility?
When's the Tuscaloosa trip?
It's the 31st through the 2nd, so that Wednesday through Friday. Yeah.
What if we met again, like towards the end of this month, or is that too much? What do y'all think?
We've got some busy calendars here. Let me see.
So like the 25th, you're saying, Russell?
Possibly, yeah. Thursday the 25th.
I can do that.
Let me get back in here, Russell. Okay, mute. Okay. I have something at 3:00, but otherwise I can make it.
Thursday the 25th. Mr. Jones, is that okay with you? Thursday the 25th?
I'm checking my calendar right now. Sarah, would you check your calendar as well to make sure you're okay with that?
I'm available.
Looks like I am as well.
Okay. Doug? Good. John, you good? Okay. I think we're good.
Can I have a?
Great.
Are we back to WebEx all the time?
No. We'll see. I mean, I'd rather not be. We'll see.
Okay.
All right.
Got it.
All right. Unanimous consent to adjourn. Our next meeting will be Thursday, August 25th at 1:00. Unanimous consent to adjourn.
Yes.
All right. Great. We're adjourned. Thank you, staff, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care.